In the studio with me is Senior Attorney Silvie FELIX KOUBÍKOVÁ from KOUBÍKOVÁ Legal, who has helped a lot of experts in issues pertaining to divorce, child custody, removal of child abroad, and settlement of marital assets. Hi Silvie, welcome to our podcast.
Hello Ashley, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming. I know you're a busy person with a law firm and so it's been hard for you maybe to come to make such time.
But also, on the other hand, I really try to focus on work for expats and in international cases, and I think it is really important to sort of spread awareness about specifics of such cases for expats, so people know what their rights are, what their options are. So this is, I guess, a great opportunity to spread even more awareness in this field, in these expat groups. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe you can tell our listeners your name and where you come from and your firm and how you got about to be helping experts.
So my name is Silvie FELIX KOUBÍKOVÁ, as you mentioned, and I'm an attorney at law. And 6 years ago, I founded my own law firm, which specializes in international private law and cross-border cases, which basically means that we work for foreigners, but also for Czechs who, for instance, would have a foreign spouse, or there might be any other foreign element in the case, because these cases are very specific. You need to speak foreign languages, you need to be aware of all the specifics these cases have, and it's very different working with foreigners than working with the Czech clients. So basically, my aim when founding my own law firm was to really focus on these international cases and to gather a group of people who would be as passionate as I am about all the international cases, who are multilingual, but also able to sort of put themselves into the client's feet, because it is really very different to work with foreigners than with the Czech people, not only with relationships, but even with legal services. These people would have different expectations because they know how it works in their country, but that necessarily doesn't mean it's the same here. So that's why basically I founded KOUBÍKOVÁ Legal Law Firm.
That is so true, and thank you for doing that, because with the increase of globalization and how people can travel and live in another country, the increase in expats, people studying abroad, it has made it easier for people to end up in intercultural and interracial relationships. So for that case, you need law firms like you who will be able to take that into consideration and help these expats. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, well, it is indeed true. Even from a legal perspective, within EU, we have free movement of people. So, of course, the number of international couples is increasing, but even on a global scale, because even with third countries, you have at least for 90 days easy access to a country, and then you can extend and apply for a visa and stay. So, indeed, the numbers have raised. And it's true, as you mentioned at the beginning, the struggles for these couples are even higher, because even if you have a monocultural relationship, I mean, it's not easy to maintain a good relationship.
True.
And if language barrier adds up, and cultural differences and all this stuff, it's different. And people at the beginning normally do not realize how more difficult it could be. They are not aware of how, for instance, language barrier can cause trouble. If your partner is a native speaker and you speak English in the relationship, you will never be able to express yourself as good, and that might bring trouble. Or you might have some expectations from your own culture that necessarily cannot be just translated automatically to a different culture. So I would say anyone who has a partner from a different country or a culture, they should pay even more attention to discussing all the possibilities, especially if they decide to have a family or to get married. They should really discuss what are their expectations in terms of raising the kids, how the division of roles between the man and the woman would be, because I think everyone carries a lot of stereotypes and automatic expectations, and just people expect they would share it, but not necessarily. And as I said, not even in a monocultural couple, and in a bi or multicultural, even more so.
Yeah, because you have to bring in parenting styles, you have to bring in religion. If the other person is religious and the others is like, no, religion is not for me, then you have to bring in also the society you're growing your kids in. Most of the times, these experts, you find that they raise kids in a third culture, meaning we are both expats in Czech Republic, and we are raising our kid. The kid is not being raised in my country or in your country. It's just a third country.
Yes.
So they don't have that sense of belonging, because I can go back home. To me, it's home, and my partner can go back home. But how about the kid? Where does the kid belong? And I think we don't talk enough about those things and how it affects the family as a whole. Even when it's one partner, like in my example, I'm living in my partner's country, so the kid, it's their country. But there's also that sense of like, you don't have your family here, the support, and you have to always adapt to what the country offers, and it's really, really stressful on the family as a whole.
Yes, and especially if you decide to have a kid abroad, not in your country, that is a very responsible decision, because, and speaking from legal perspective specifically, there are many legal implications that you just have to accept, because basically once you have a kid with the habitual residence in a country, it is tied to that country of habitual residence. You cannot just one day decide, well, this is not my home, I want to go back home and I want to take my kid. Well, for this you either need the consent of the father of the child, or you need to undergo legal proceedings. It's not just in this specific issue. I meet a lot of expat clients who just expect this would be automatic, and then when I inform them what needs to be done and that it's not automatic, even if you're a mother, that you cannot take your child anywhere, they are normally very surprised. So it is really important to be aware of all these implications, and to ideally really listen to this podcast to get information about what you can and you cannot do.
And also the society at large. I don't know, like how are Czechs towards couples of interracial, intercultural relationships?
Well, I like to think that it's great, that Czechs are open-minded, and we have a very accepting community or country. The truth is, this is rather my social bubble. I am from Prague, and I've been living here my whole life, and I have a lot of international friends, so I kind of live in quite an international environment, even thanks to my work. But the truth is that unfortunately this is not a general standard. And for instance, if we move from Prague and we look at Moravia and some small village, this would be a completely different world, and I can imagine that for a foreigner there, and then even if we, for instance, speak about different race, that might be very difficult. And when I ask my friends or even clients about their experiences, they are not always necessarily nice, because we still need to get used to it more, especially, I mean, Prague is very international and multicultural, but outside of Prague, it's not so much of a standard, and people, especially elderly people, they are just not used to it, because of course, because of the past, because of the communist past, because of the borders that were closed, also with the news, that you get about immigrants and about Muslim religion and so on. Sometimes you'd have information which is not necessarily accurate, but these people are not used to verify all the information. They don't know or didn't know that fake news exists, and they wouldn't rely that much on the internet. So I would guess that we still have a lot of work to do as a nation in this field.
It's not just here. I think as a whole world, we still have a lot to do, even in countries where diversity leads. In America or in South Africa, economic diversity is everywhere. It's still so hard for everyone to accept intercultural, racial relationships, especially for some of the cultures where they were closed a bit, and it's only taking now for them to open up to outsiders. Let's say maybe like, for example, Indian cultures, they are into like marry only around Indian people because of their culture. But over the years, I've seen interracial couples which involve Indian people marrying someone else outside of their culture or their race, and it's just how the times are. The times are changing.
Yes.
So it's really nice. So we have already talked like the effects of intercultural and interracial relationships on marriage, how it's a lot of weight for them to carry, and so now we go into the part where it has become irreparable for the couple, to a point where they seem they cannot live together and they have to separate, which is what has been going on a lot this past couple of days. I even said, why is it like every post that I see on Facebook in this women group talks about a woman wanting to divorce their Czech spouse? And this has made me do this podcast because I have seen a lot of women having the same issue, and they don't know where to go. They don't know the laws. Everyone says whatever they want in the comments, and I just think this is a great episode for everyone who's going through that to listen at the comfort of their home. Let's say you get into that point in your life. What are the conditions of obtaining a divorce?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that when people refer to divorce, it is a general term, but usually there are 3 or even more legal issues or legal matters that are included, because it is the custody of children, which normally when people speak about divorce, they mean, you know, the whole package. So we have kids, we are married, we have some marital assets, and we want to settle all this. So that's why it doesn't go within one legal proceedings. So that's why it's important to explain that these are basically 3 or even more separate legal issues. So first of all, you have custody proceedings, which defines who will have a custody, what would be the contacts with the non-residential, non-custodial parent, and what would be the maintenance that the non-residential parent would be paying for the kid. So that's like the first package. Second, there's divorce, the actual divorce, so meaning the termination of the marriage, which is second legal proceedings. And then third topic would be settlement of marital assets. This third one could go together with the divorce, but not necessarily. I'll explain later on when I speak about the types of divorce. And on top of that, there might be also maintenance for divorced spouse, which is another legal title, another thing which again is dealt with within separate legal proceedings. So if we speak about the conditions for obtaining a divorce, so we have 3 types of divorces in the Czech Republic. It is the standard one, then there's agreed one, and then contested one. So like a normal one, then easy one, and then a hard one.
Okay.
But generally, let me say that to divorce in the Czech Republic is fairly easy.
Okay.
This has to do with the fact that the Czech Republic is an atheist country, which means that we do not really stick to marriage, which no longer works. So
yeah, you don't frown upon people who want to divorce.
Yes, exactly. And usually, you know, if you compare it with other jurisdictions, countries like Poland or other mostly Catholic countries or even Muslim countries, that's more difficult because the religious reasons are behind it. So basically, we only have one single divorce ground, which is the irretrievable and permanent and deep breakdown of marriage. That's one sole divorce ground. And it means we are a no-fault jurisdiction. It means that the court would not verify who is, let's say, the guilty person. Yes, exactly, who caused it. In some jurisdictions, it is necessary, and it only adds up the stress. And even with couples who would like to divorce and they mutually want it, they would have to agree who's going to be the bad guy. So this is good. In the Czech Republic, we don't have that. As long as it's proved that there's an irretrievable breakdown of marriage, the court would grant a divorce. And you don't even necessarily need a collaboration of the other spouse, because the divorce petition, it's a unilateral act. So basically the one who wants to start the proceedings would lodge it with court, and then the court will proceed. And even if the other party would not approve of the petition, as long as the irretrievable breakdown of marriage is proved, the court will grant a divorce. So that's basically how it works, which is why the basic conditions are quite simple.
So if your partner is abusing you, you can just go file for divorce and divorce him without even talking to him.
Yes, I mean, then eventually you will meet at court.
Yes,
because there has to be a hearing, but you don't need him to co-sign the petition or do anything else. You can do this on your own, and the court will just verify the facts and then divorce the marriage. Now let's get back to the 3 types of the divorces we have. So the standard one, that's basically this. You just submit a divorce petition. You need to describe why there is the irretrievable breakdown of marriage. The petition could be very simple. This is the divorce that would not be linked with any marital assets, liquidation or settlement. It's just about the divorce. But that's basically the crucial thing, because it terminates the marriage, which is the most essential thing in this sense. Then, provided that both spouses agree on the divorce, there is also the so-called agreed divorce, which is, let's say, the simpler version. And in this case, you need to have the agreement of the other spouse who co-signs the divorce petition. So in this case, it must be mutual. And then the marriage must last at least 1 year, and you must no longer cohabitate for at least 6 months. And you need to sign an agreement on settlement of marital assets. And you basically submit this signed agreement to court, and the court will divorce you without much fuss around it, because given there's the consent of both parties, so that's why it is easy. The courts are pretty informal with this type of petition, and also the advantage is that you settle the marital assets within the divorce, because as I've mentioned at the beginning, normally settlement of marital assets wouldn't be part of the divorce, but with this agreed divorce, you sort of like have two legal issues dealt with at once within one proceedings, because it encompasses the marital assets. And then the third type, the contested divorce, as we call it, I mean, in practice, it is super rare. I've never really seen it myself in my practice to be applied, so I will mention it just super briefly. And basically means that should the divorce be against the best interest of the children born within the marriage, the court might refuse to grant the divorce. Or secondly, should the divorce be against the interest of the spouse who did not cause the breakdown of the marriage, the court also could refuse to grant the divorce. In the latter case, it could only last for 3 years, so it doesn't mean that the court would refuse to divorce the marriage forever, but it could delay the divorce.
So, sorry, when you mean it's not in the best interest of the kids, what does that mean, for example?
Oh, that would mean some very severe situation, and as I said, I've never seen it applied, so it's more like a theory. Let's say you have a very sick child, and the child depends on both parents and their cooperation, but still, it must be in the best interest of the child, which means the parents must be able to get along. So it means if there's really a breakdown of the marriage, of the relationship,
you are stuck together.
Yeah, but then it would harm the child. So in that case, the court would grant it, because generally speaking, every divorce in a way is against the best interest of the child.
Right? If you want to apply for divorce, what papers do you have to bring to the court to apply?
So you need the divorce petition.
Is it like a form?
No, it is. We don't have forms for petitions in the Czech Republic, so it is basically just like a letter. Let's say
you just write a letter at home.
Basically, yeah. Petition, that seems very fancy or complicated. We can just use a letter. Yeah, so it's a letter that you address to the competent court, and you basically describe who you are, who your husband is, or wife, and why do you see an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. And you may attach evidence if you want to. It's not necessary, because generally the court is there to help. So if you file a petition which would be incomplete, the court will not dismiss it, but the court will get back to you and would explain you what's missing, what you need to complete. So basically, it's always good to attach a marriage certificate, so the court knows that there actually has been a marriage. In this context, maybe it's good to say that if people get married outside of the Czech Republic, they need to register the marriage in the Czech Republic, provided at least one of them is a Czech citizen. The Czech Republic needs to be aware of the marriage, and there is a special registry, civil registry, which is seated in Brno, in the city of Brno in Moravia, which registers these foreign marriages of spouses. So, because if you want to divorce in the Czech Republic, your marriage needs to be registered here for Czech citizens.
Yeah, I read that because we married in Taiwan, and when we got here, we had to register the marriage, and they took the certificate that they gave us in Taiwan, and they gave us a Czech marriage certificate.
Yeah. But then you got the Taiwanese as well, right? You should have both.
No, they took the Taiwanese certificate and gave us a Czech one.
Okay, well, that's normal that they give you a Czech one, but then they should also give you back the original one. You can keep both. So maybe call them and tell them, well, give us back.
And where do you lodge this application for divorce?
Well, it depends. So generally, the last common residence of both spouses, or the district court in the place of the last habitual residence of the spouse. So basically, the last common address of the spouses provided that one of them still resides within the district of this court. So the typical situation would be that the spouses live together in an apartment and then one moves out, so normally the other one stays there, which means that it's still the competent court. So you just need to sort of Google what district court is within this address or covers this address, and then to this court you file the petition. Should you for some reason be wrong and file to a wrong court, that's fine, because the court will take care of it. As soon as the court learns that it's not the correct one, they would just transfer it to the correct court. When a participant is not represented by an attorney, they are there to help you. You can even come to court and ask them if they have a template of a petition or if they can assist or something like that. So generally the court is not something to be afraid of, and any mistake is generally, almost any mistake is reparable, and the court can help in this sense.
Yeah, actually I wanted to ask, like, do you always have to have a lawyer to file this petition? And also, does the court offer English services to help when you are not a Czech speaker? And also, again, do you write your letter in Czech? Does it have to be translated, or you can just submit it in English?
You do not have to have a lawyer.
Okay.
It's not obligatory, it's up to you, and you don't have to. The language of the court proceedings, it's Czech. However, everyone whose mother tongue is not Czech has right to have interpreter. So it means you can ask the court, but even if the court sees that you are a non-Czech speaker, they will appoint you an interpreter. And this interpreter, it's paid by the Czech Republic, so there are no costs for the party to have such interpreter. The whole procedure is automatic, which means that you can also correspond with the court in your mother tongue, because it's then the responsibility of the court to translate it. So let's say we have a French woman who wants to divorce. She doesn't speak Czech, so she would draft her petition, so the letter for the court in French. She'll send it, then the court needs to have it translated, and then everything that the court would send to this woman would be translated by the court-appointed interpreter into French, so she can basically act into proceedings. And then when there's a hearing, a divorce hearing, so the interpreter will be present. So again, this woman can be in touch, can even express herself in her mother tongue. So
that is so different from what you read on the streets of Facebook. Because honest to you, I think I read that they say you have to pay for the interpreter from your own pocket.
No. Not in civil proceedings. So this is one good thing about the Czech Republic, because in many foreign jurisdictions, this is something you have to pay from your own pocket. But here it's not, and we provide this as a service of the state. And it's got a lot of logic in it, because, you know, if you want to divorce and you don't speak Czech, I mean, you have a right to divorce, and if you cannot afford an interpreter, so that would disable you from being able to divorce. So, you know, the services of interpreter are for free. Also, if you think that you need a lawyer, because maybe it's a complex issue, and you cannot afford it, you can also ask the court to appoint you an attorney free of charge. In this case, with the interpreter, it's automatic. You don't have to do anything else, and everybody has it for free, no matter how much your salary is or how much you earn. With attorney free of charge for this, if you ask the court for this, the court would send you a form to fill in, because you need to prove that you qualify for legal aid, so services free of charge. If you do, then the court will also appoint you attorney free of charge.
So what qualifies you for the legal aid, for example?
Yes, because you need to fill in. So they send you a form, and you fill in a form regarding what your income is, what your assets are, and so on. And based on all this, the court checks, okay, this person qualifies. Okay. There's not like, this person must be under, I don't know, 20,000 Czech crowns or something like that per month, because also property is being assessed and so on. So there's not like one single bar, but generally people who would not have enough resources would be able to get free legal aid.
Yeah. And how long usually does the divorce take if it's, say, not contested or there are no problems?
If it's not contested, that would be a couple months. It always depends on the workload of each court. In Prague, it tends to be a little longer because the workload is just higher. Outside of Prague, normally it's a little shorter. In a case where it's not contested and it's rather rather agreed, it would be 3 to 6 months to finalize the custody proceedings, and roughly the same thing would be with the divorce. So let's say within half a year both could be completed. But of course, if it's not completely agreed, that there are more than one hearing might be needed, and then every party has right to appeal, and then there would be evidence, there might be experts. So if we speak about not agreed situation, this might be a couple of years.
Yeah. Can the court allow the divorce to go through even if one spouse refuses to divorce?
Yes, yes, completely. The only thing that the other party could do would be prolong the proceedings when they do not show up, when they do not accept mail from the court, but they cannot really prevent from it unless they would successfully apply for the contested divorce, which, however, as I said, in practice is almost impossible. So generally, even if you don't have the cooperation of the other party, you still would be granted the divorce. The only question is when, so what the other party would do to sort of try to prolong it.
Yeah, and what happens if the other party lives in another EU member state, or let's say in a third country?
So generally, one important thing to emphasize is that whenever there's international element, the first thing you need to do at the very beginning is to verify the court jurisdiction, so courts of what country can hear the divorce case, and then applicable laws. So it means laws of what country would be applied. So this is a case in every situation where there would be a foreign element, so one of the spouses would not be Czech. The rules for international jurisdiction and for applicable laws are very complex, so there's not like one single rule, and basically this must be verified with every case based on the citizenship of both spouses and their habitual residence, because we have national laws on this, there are EU regulations, and then there are international treaties, multilateral and bilateral, which is why it's a very complex matter. The fact that the other spouse is not living in the Czech Republic is not a problem as itself. Maybe the jurisdiction would not fall within the Czech Republic, and you would need to file in the country where that person lives. But generally within EU, if one spouse is living in the EU, they can divorce in the Czech Republic, provided that the conditions as per the regulation apply. But generally it's fine. And then even we have a regulation which enables the circulation of the judgments, which means that if, for instance, you have a judgment from the Czech Republic, it would be automatically applicable in all the EU member states, which means you don't need to undergo a recognition procedure, because say you divorce in the Czech Republic and but you got married in the US and you are an American citizen, so you want the divorce also to be, of course, recognized in the US. So in this case, because there's no international treaty, you have to undergo a special procedure in the US to have the Czech decision recognized. Okay. So there are many implications to take into account.
It's not a straight line.
Oh, it's not straightforward at all.
Every divorce has its consequences, and one of the top 5 probably is like you have to, as you said, the alimony, child maintenance, custody, which is like really serious. But I'm just gonna go through all of them one by one, and I'll ask you about them. Okay. So first, how do you go about changing your name, for example?
So if you changed your name when you got married, so within a deadline of 6 months after divorce, you can decide that you want to get back to your last name that you had before marriage. And you just need to announce this to the civil registry. It's automatic. If you tell them I want it, they will not be asking anything. You don't have to ask for anything. You just inform them, and then automatically you get back to your old name. The only thing is you have to keep in mind that it's possible within 6 months as of the finality of the judgment divorce. Okay. Should you miss the deadline, it's not so much of a big deal, because basically you can change your last name anytime. The difference is that it wouldn't be automatic, and you have to undergo an administrative procedure based on which you basically ask the registry to change the last name. So it's a little more complicated, but they would grant it. So, but it's more practical to keep in mind the deadline of 6 months, so it can be automatic.
Nice, thank you. And now the division of property. Let's say there is no prenup. Actually, how does the prenup work in Czech?
So marital property, as per the Czech laws, that is everything that both spouses acquire during the course of marriage. One thing which is important, and people often don't know that, is that the status of the property pre-marriage remains intact. which means whatever you owned or your husband owned before getting married, that remains your exclusive property. And only on the day of your marriage, your marital assets are beginning to be created. But then, as of the date of the marriage, everything you acquire, your husband acquires, is marital assets. It's important to note that when I say everything, with a couple exceptions, it really is everything. So say you have a bank account and it's in your name, and you have a salary that's coming to this bank account. Still, the money in the bank account is marital assets. The fact that it's on an account in your name, that's irrelevant. It just means you dispose of it. But legally, the property belongs to both spouses. Same thing if you buy a car and on the car documents, only you are registered. Still, if you buy it during marriage, it is marital assets. So it belongs to both of you. And this applies not only to assets, but also debt.
I have a lot of stay-at-home moms who are expats, and they found themselves in this country they don't belong to, and in a marriage they don't want to be in anymore. But then they're always worried, like, if I leave, I would have nothing because I haven't worked. I have been sitting at home with the baby. My husband has been working, and he's telling me that if I leave him, I would basically not have anything. So how long does it take that the court decides to give you your part of your assets before you basically start living under the streets?
So first of all, one thing to emphasize is that within the settlement of marital assets, it's important to have relevant information. If you come to court and say, well, I think my husband is rich, but actually I don't know his bank accounts, I don't know what he owns, where he owns it, well, the court is not a detective. The court will not, in this regard, help very much to verify. So one thing which is really important is be aware of the assets, if possible. Know the accounts, know the properties, be active. Don't be just the one who receives some sum to her account and has no idea what's the wage, details about the husband or wife. If you think the divorce is coming, and if you can, just make copies of all the relevant documents, because this really helps. If then I have a client who basically tells me, I think it's like this, but I have nothing, it's very difficult to get to some information, and it might be expensive, and still we may not be able to gather the relevant evidence. So this is one thing. Just be aware that you are responsible for the evidence you provide to court, and try to really have as much information as you can about the assets. Then, speaking about respective rights, it's important to say that 3 financial entitlements would be the basic ones, and that is maintenance for children, maintenance for the wife. That's important. Not only children have right to have maintenance, but the spouses as well. And then there would be the actual entitlement from the settlement of the marital assets. So when it comes to maintenance for children, the children have the right to have the same standard of living as their parents. So let's say the father would be rich. So in this case, the maintenance for the children would be rather high. There's no like higher limit or something like that. They should be able to maintain more or less the same standard of their lives after the breakup as they had within the marriage of their parents. Then secondly, there's the right for maintenance of the spouse. The spouses, again, should have the same standard of living without the marriage. So the wife doesn't have to be afraid of applying to court to have her maintenance. One thing which is important to emphasize is that after divorce, the rule of the same standard of living no longer applies, which means that, let's say we have a husband and a wife, so during the marriage the wife should have the same standard of living, so the husband should be paying her, let's say, half of his salary minus all the costs they pay, okay? After the marriage, the maintenance of divorced spouse is only to cover basically basic costs. It is very low in the Czech Republic, which is why it's important to file for the spousal maintenance during the course of marriage, because during the course of marriage you're going to get much more money than you would after the divorce, speaking about maintenance. And then marital assets, so that basically, the law basically says that each spouse has right to 1/2 of marital assets. So it is defined by everything that they acquired as of the marriage. So basically upon divorce, the court recaps what is left. So it doesn't mean they would liquidate whatever was spent and who spent it and how. No, that's not sort of being reimbursed. But everything that exists and that is left on the day of divorce is the marital assets, and this is basically divided in half. Should it be a problem that it might take too long, we have a special legal measure which is called an injunction. So if, for instance, the father would leave the family and the mother has no money and she obviously needs to provide for her kids, so she can file to court the petition seeking an injunction. And the specific thing about injunction is that the court has a deadline of 7 days to decide about it. So it's super quick. Within these 7 days, the counterparty is not being contacted. You file it, the court decides, and if the court grants it, then the other party has the right to appeal. So it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be heard and they wouldn't be able to give their opinion, but just because it's so quick. So that's why they are not being notified, because it might delay the process. So that's why normally if you seek for injunction in custody matters in terms of maintenance for minor children, the court would grant it almost every time. It wouldn't be at that point the maximum amount, because at that point obviously the court couldn't verify the evidence and hear the other party. But at least to have, you know, some money for that time, that's a very efficient tool. And speaking about maintenance, let me also mention one more thing. We also have in the Czech Republic the so-called maintenance for single mother, which belongs to a mother who has a child and she's not married to the father of the child. So obviously she's not entitled to spousal maintenance, but until the age of 2 years of the child, the father of the child must also pay maintenance to the mother of the child. And now I'm speaking about her maintenance.
Yes.
Of course, he needs to pay maintenance for the kid as well, but on top of that, he also needs to pay for the mother. So that's also very practical to know.
That's really nice.
And in this, you also can apply for the injunction, so you have the money faster.
That's really nice. Now, I want to go back to the point where you said she has to file for the spousal support during the marriage, not after the divorce, so that the spousal support is a bit higher. When you say during the marriage, do you mean when you are planning to divorce?
It could be any time, but the point is, when you decide to divorce, there's usually a long period between you decide to divorce and you actually are formally divorced.
Okay.
And first, you need to undergo the custody proceedings, and the court must decide about the custody. I said that it would take 3 to 6 months if it goes okay, if there's agreement of the parents. Imagine there's no agreement, and there are some cases when the custody proceedings are long and exhausting because the parents are fighting very much, or it's a very complex situation. So it may take a year, 2 years. During all this time, you are still married, but normally the spouses no longer live together because they broke up.
But the other spouse has to still keep the same standard of living at this point, because it hasn't been decided.
Exactly, because they are still married. Then you apply for divorce, which again might take a couple months up to a year if the other party is making troubles. So if you add this up, it may be 2-3 years that you still are formally married, but the couple no longer lives together. And so during this whole time, the husband or wife, just the other one, non-residential one, must pay the maintenance to the first one. And the standard of living still should be the same because they are still married. So it means that's why it's practical to apply for the spousal maintenance, because it may be a couple of years until the divorce is formalized, and during all this time you're entitled for the spousal maintenance, because at this time normally that's the hardest part. The spouses no longer live together, and sometimes the other partner, the one who moved out, would not be paying much because they would await how the court proceedings would terminate. So it can be very difficult for the residential parent, and that's why they might need to file for injunctions and to file even not for maintenance for children, but also for the spousal one, so they have means to live from during this whole time.
Yeah, that's really harsh. Okay, so now let's go on the custody issue, which is usually takes longer and longer. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to be a part of our Dear Ladies Network community, visit our website www.dearladiesnet.com or follow our socials on Instagram and Facebook at dearladies.network. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. Until next time.